Before history had names, monsters already had teeth. Tonight, we travel beyond written memory into the myths that shaped fear itself. Creatures whispered around fires, carved into stone, and feared by civilizations long erased. These beings weren't invented for stories, they were born from humanity's earliest attempts to explain darkness, death, and the unknown. From primal gods twisted into beasts, to nightmares older than language, each monster carries a truth about the people who feared it. Lock the doors, dim the lights, and step back in time, where legend ends and terror begins. This is where ancient fear still breathes eternally. Echidna, mother of monsters. Echidna, known in Greek mythology as the mother of monsters, occupies a unique and unsettling position within the ancient mythic imagination. Neither fully divine nor wholly bestial, she embodies the fears, boundaries, and contradictions that shaped Greek understandings of chaos, femininity, and the natural world. Echidna is not merely a villain or a background figure who produces famous beasts, she is a symbolic nexus where myth, psychology, cosmology, and cultural anxiety intersect. To understand Echidna is to understand why Greek myths required monsters at all, and why those monsters so often emerge from a single, maternal source. According to most ancient sources, Echidna was a hybrid being, beautiful above the waist and serpentine below. Hesiod describes her as a nymph with a lovely face, living in a deep cave, immortal and ageless, yet isolated from both gods and mortals. This dual form is crucial to her meaning. Beauty and horror coexist within her body, reflecting the Greek tendency to associate danger with seduction and the unknown. Her serpent half links her to chthonic powers, the earth, and primal forces older than Olympian order. Echidna's physical form alone tells a story of boundaries crossed and categories undone. The parentage of Echidna varies across sources, which further emphasizes her liminal nature. Some traditions name her as the daughter of Phorcys and Ceto, ancient sea deities associated with monstrous offspring. Others claim she was born from Tartarus and Gaia, or even chaos itself. Each genealogy situates her close to the primordial origins of the cosmos. Echidna is therefore not an accident of creation but a natural consequence of the world's earliest energies. She arises from the same forces that produced the gods, reminding audiences that order and disorder share a common origin. Echidna's most enduring identity comes from her role as the mate of Typhon, the greatest monster to challenge Zeus. Typhon represents violent, unchecked chaos, a force capable of overthrowing the Olympian regime. Together, Typhon and Echidna produce many of Greek mythology's most terrifying creatures. These include Cerberus, the multi-headed hound of the underworld, Orthrus, his two-headed brother, the Lernaean Hydra, the Chimera, the Sphinx, and the Nemean lion. Through her offspring, Echidna becomes the genetic source of nearly every major heroic challenge. This maternal role is not incidental. Greek myths frequently link monstrosity with lineage, suggesting that chaos reproduces itself unless actively restrained. Echidna does not personally terrorize humanity on the scale her children do, yet her womb becomes the wellspring of ongoing threat. In this sense, she is less a monster in action and more a monster in potential. She represents the fear of what might emerge if the natural order is not constantly defended. Heroes may slay her children, but the idea of Echidna implies that monstrosity can always return. The repeated deaths of Echidna's children at the hands of heroes like Heracles, Oedipus, and Bellerophon reinforce the mythic pattern of civilization conquering chaos. Each victory reasserts human and divine dominance over the wild. However, Echidna herself often remains alive in the myths, retreating back into her cave. This narrative choice is significant. Chaos is never fully destroyed, it is merely contained. Echidna's survival ensures that disorder remains a permanent, underlying possibility within the cosmos. Echidna's femininity is central to her symbolic power. As a female monster, she embodies anxiety surrounding motherhood, reproduction, and female autonomy. Unlike Olympian goddesses who bear gods or heroes, Echidna produces beings that threaten social stability. Her motherhood is generative but not nurturing in a conventional sense. This inversion reflects a patriarchal fear of uncontrolled female creativity. Echidna creates without male oversight, and the result is catastrophe. In mythic terms, she becomes a warning about fertility divorced from order. At the same time, Echidna is not portrayed as malicious in a moral sense. She does not scheme, deceive, or seek conquest. Her role is fundamentally natural rather than ethical. She gives birth because that is her function within the mythic ecosystem. This neutrality distinguishes her from later literary villains and aligns her more closely with natural disasters or wild animals. Echidna is dangerous not because she chooses evil, but because she exists outside human values. The cave where Echidna dwells further reinforces her liminality. Caves in Greek myth often function as thresholds between worlds, linking the surface to the underworld or the conscious to the unconscious. Echidna's isolation within such a space symbolizes her exclusion from structured society. She does not participate in Olympian politics, nor does she interact with mortals directly. Instead, she remains hidden, a source rather than an agent. This spatial symbolism mirrors her narrative role as an origin point for chaos. Echidna also plays an important role in defining heroism. Without monsters, heroes have no purpose. Her children serve as tests that allow figures like Heracles to prove strength, intelligence, and divine favor. In this way, Echidna indirectly contributes to the establishment of heroic identity. She is part of the system that produces cultural ideals, even as she threatens them. The mother of monsters is therefore also a midwife to heroes. From a psychological perspective, Echidna can be read as a personification of the unconscious. Her hidden dwelling, hybrid body, and monstrous offspring resemble repressed fears and instincts that emerge in distorted forms. The heroes who confront her children enact a symbolic struggle to master inner chaos. Echidna herself, never fully confronted, represents the depths of the psyche that cannot be completely resolved. Myth thus anticipates later psychological theories about repression and recurrence. Echidna's relative obscurity compared to her offspring is itself meaningful. Ancient audiences knew Cerberus and the Hydra better than their mother. This mirrors how societies often focus on visible threats while ignoring underlying causes. Echidna remains in the background, quietly essential. Her power lies not in spectacle but in continuity. She ensures that the mythic world remains dynamic rather than static. In later interpretations, especially during the Roman and medieval periods, Echidna's image hardened into a more overt symbol of evil. Christian writers, influenced by moral dualism, tended to collapse ambiguity and treat monsters as embodiments of sin. Echidna's original complexity was reduced, and her femininity was increasingly associated with temptation and corruption. This shift reveals more about changing cultural values than about the original myth. Modern scholarship has sought to recover Echidna's deeper significance. Feminist readings emphasize how she reflects male anxiety about female power and reproduction. Structuralist approaches examine her role in maintaining mythic balance. Comparative mythologists note similarities between Echidna and other maternal monster figures across cultures, suggesting a universal archetype. In all these readings, Echidna emerges as more than a footnote in heroic tales. Ultimately, Echidna endures because she represents an idea that remains relevant, that chaos is generative, not merely destructive. She reminds us that order is fragile and must be continually defended, yet also that creativity often springs from what society fears. The mother of monsters is not simply an enemy of the gods, she is a foundational element of the mythic universe. By giving birth to terror, she gives meaning to courage, structure to struggle, and depth to the ancient Greek vision of the world. Echidna's presence also invites reflection on how ancient Greeks understood nature itself. The natural world was not romanticized as gentle or benevolent, it was unpredictable, fertile, and often lethal. Echidna embodies this perception perfectly. Like storms, earthquakes, or wild animals, she produces consequences that humans must respond to rather than morally judge. Her children function as localized disasters, each representing a specific fear. The Hydra's regenerative heads suggest problems that multiply when attacked improperly, while the Sphinx's riddles imply the danger of ignorance and intellectual failure. Through Echidna's offspring, abstract anxieties are given concrete form. The mythic logic surrounding Echidna also reinforces the authority of Zeus and the Olympian order. By allowing Echidna to exist but limiting her influence through the defeat of her children, the myths present Zeus as a ruler who manages chaos rather than erasing it. Total annihilation of primordial forces would destabilize the cosmos, but unchecked freedom would be equally disastrous. Echidna's continued survival therefore validates the balance Zeus claims to maintain. She is the shadow that makes his light meaningful. Artistic representations of Echidna, though rare, emphasize her hybridity and isolation. Vase paintings and later mosaics often depict her emerging from shadows or entwined with serpents, reinforcing her association with secrecy and earthbound power. Unlike the Olympians, she is seldom shown in communal scenes. This visual marginalization parallels her narrative marginalization, yet it also heightens her mystique. What is unseen or half-seen is often more frightening than what is fully revealed. Echidna's myth further complicates Greek ideas of immortality. Although she is described as immortal in some sources, her children are not. They can be killed, often spectacularly, by mortals aided by gods. This contrast underscores a hierarchy of existence in which origins outlast manifestations. Echidna endures because she represents a principle rather than an event. As long as the world exists, so too does the possibility of monstrosity. The mother of monsters also challenges simple distinctions between victim and villain. Some traditions suggest that Echidna was eventually slain by Argus or Heracles while she slept, an act that frames her less as a threat and more as a suppressed force. If she is killed, it is not through open confrontation but through ambush, implying discomfort with facing what she represents directly. Even in death, Echidna remains symbolically potent, because the idea of her cannot be so easily destroyed. In contemporary culture, Echidna has experienced a quiet revival. She appears in modern fantasy literature, role-playing games, and reinterpretations of myth that emphasize morally complex antagonists. These versions often restore her agency and voice, portraying her as a grieving mother or a guardian of ancient ways rather than a mere monster factory. Such retellings reflect modern discomfort with purely heroic narratives and an increased interest in marginalized perspectives. Echidna's endurance across millennia demonstrates the adaptability of myth. While specific interpretations change, the core image of a maternal source of danger persists because it speaks to fundamental human concerns. Fear of the unknown, anxiety about origins, and the tension between creation and destruction are not confined to ancient Greece. Echidna gives these concerns a face, or rather, a half-hidden face, eternally retreating into the shadows of the cultural imagination. To write and explain Echidna is therefore to engage with myth as a living system rather than a closed story. She cannot be reduced to a single meaning without losing what makes her compelling. She is mother and monster, source and threat, passive and powerful. In holding these contradictions together, Echidna exemplifies the richness of Greek mythology itself. She reminds us that myths endure not because they offer clear answers, but because they give lasting form to the questions humanity continues to ask. Jormungandr, the world encircler. Jormungandr, the world encircler, stands among the most awe-inspiring figures in Norse mythology. Known also as the Midgard serpent, he is a colossal sea serpent whose body is so immense that it coils around the entire human world, Midgard, and grasps its own tail. More than a monster of sheer size, Jormungandr embodies cosmic balance, inevitable destruction, and the fragile boundary between order and chaos. His story is inseparable from the fate of gods and humans alike, culminating in the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok. To understand Jormungandr is to understand how Norse myth perceived the universe, cyclical, doomed, and bound by unbreakable destinies. Jormungandr is one of three monstrous children born to the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angeroda. His siblings are the wolf Fenrir and Hel, ruler of the realm of the dead. From the moment of their birth, the gods of Asgard recognized that these children were not ordinary beings but forces destined to bring calamity. Odin, chief of the gods, acted swiftly to contain the threat. Fenrir was eventually bound, Hel was cast into the underworld, and Jormungandr was hurled into the deep ocean surrounding Midgard. Rather than perishing, the serpent grew until he encircled the world itself, becoming both its boundary and its looming peril. The image of Jormungandr biting his own tail is deeply symbolic. It echoes the ancient motif of the Ouroboros, a serpent devouring itself, representing infinity, cycles, and self-renewal. In the Norse context, however, this image is darker. Jormungandr's endless coil signifies the inescapable nature of fate. The world exists within his grasp, and as long as he holds his tail, the cosmos remains intact. Should he release it, the balance would be broken, and the end would begin. Thus, his very existence is both stabilizing and threatening, a reminder that order persists only because destruction waits patiently. Jormungandr's most famous adversary is Thor, the god of thunder. Their rivalry is one of the central conflicts of Norse mythology, representing the struggle between divine order and primordial chaos. Thor encounters the world serpent on multiple occasions, each meeting intensifying their mutual enmity. One of the most well-known episodes occurs during Thor's journey to the land of the giants, where he goes fishing with the giant Hymir. Using the head of an ox as bait, Thor hooks Jormungandr from the depths of the sea. The struggle that follows is titanic. Thor braces his feet through the boat, pulls with all his might, and nearly strikes the serpent dead with his hammer, Mjolnir. Before he can deliver the killing blow, Hymir, terrified of the consequences, cuts the line, allowing Jormungandr to sink back into the ocean. This episode reveals several layers of meaning. Thor's near victory shows that chaos can be confronted and momentarily subdued, but not destroyed before its appointed time. Hymir's fear reflects the recognition that some forces are too fundamental to eliminate prematurely. Jormungandr is not merely a monster to be slain, he is a necessary component of the cosmic order. His survival ensures that Ragnarok will come when it must, not before. At Ragnarok, the final battle of the gods, Jormungandr emerges fully from the sea, releasing his tail and flooding the world with his movements. His presence poisons the sky and sea, spreading venom that chokes life itself. In the climactic confrontation, Thor and Jormungandr face each other once more. This time, the struggle ends in mutual destruction. Thor succeeds in killing the serpent, but after taking only 9 steps, he collapses and dies from the venom coursing through his veins. This grim ending encapsulates a core Norse belief: even the mightiest gods are not immune to fate, and victory often comes at an unbearable cost. Jormungandr's role at Ragnarok emphasizes the Norse vision of heroism. Triumph is not measured by survival but by fulfilling one's destiny with courage. Thor knows he will not survive the encounter, yet he faces the serpent regardless. Similarly, Jormungandr does not act out of malice alone but because his nature demands it. Both are bound to their roles, illustrating a universe governed not by moral absolutes but by necessity. Beyond mythic narrative, Jormungandr also reflects the Norse relationship with the sea. For seafaring Scandinavian cultures, the ocean was both a source of life and a realm of terror. It provided trade routes, food, and exploration, yet it also concealed storms, shipwrecks, and unknown depths. Jormungandr personifies this ambivalence. He dwells in the sea's abyss, unseen but ever-present, capable of rising at any moment to bring destruction. The idea that the world itself is ringed by such a creature expresses both respect and fear for the natural forces surrounding human existence. Jormungandr also functions as a boundary marker. By encircling Midgard, he defines the limits of the human world. Beyond him lies the unknown, the realm of giants, chaos, and unshaped potential. This boundary is not merely geographical but existential. Humans live within a fragile enclosure, protected temporarily from cosmic chaos. The serpent's coil is the line between civilization and annihilation, a reminder that safety is provisional and borrowed. In modern interpretations, Jormungandr has taken on new meanings while retaining his mythic power. He appears in literature, games, and popular culture as a symbol of apocalyptic threat or ancient wisdom. Some see him as an ecological metaphor, representing the consequences of humanity's imbalance with nature. Others view him philosophically, as an embodiment of cyclical time and the inevitability of endings that lead to new beginnings. These reinterpretations testify to the enduring resonance of the world encircler. Ultimately, Jormungandr is not simply a villain to be feared but a profound mythological construct. He represents the tension at the heart of existence: stability sustained by restrained destruction, life encircled by death, and meaning forged in the face of unavoidable doom. His story teaches that the world persists not because chaos is absent, but because it is contained, coiled tightly around us, waiting for the moment when the cycle must begin anew. In this way, Jormungandr remains one of the most powerful symbols in Norse mythology, a serpent whose shadow still circles the human imagination. The Nameless Ones, pre-god spirits. Before gods were named, before myth learned to speak in titles and hierarchies, there existed entities known only in fragments of memory and implication, the Nameless Ones. These pre-god spirits were not deities in the familiar sense, nor were they mere forces of nature. They were conditions of existence itself: awareness without identity, power without intention, presence without narrative. To understand them is not to catalogue beings, but to approach the threshold where being itself first learned how to be. The Nameless Ones emerged in the earliest conceptual moment of reality, when distinction had not yet solidified into form. There was no sky to rule, no underworld to govern, no mortals to worship. Instead, existence unfolded as a raw continuum of potential. Within this continuum, the nameless ones coalesced not as individuals, but as self-sustaining states of primordial awareness. They did not exist in space and time, rather, space and time condensed around their persistence. Unlike later gods, the nameless ones had no fixed shapes. Form, as a concept, had not yet stabilized. They manifested as tendencies: compression, expansion, recursion, stillness, dissolution. When later myths describe them as storms, shadows, or endless seas, these are metaphors imposed retroactively by minds that require imagery. In truth, the nameless ones were closer to principles than personalities, yet more aware than mere laws. They are called nameless not because names were forgotten, but because names were impossible. A name requires separation, this thing as opposed to that thing. The nameless ones existed prior to such divisions. To name them would have been to diminish them, to force singularity onto what was inherently plural and fluid. Even now, any attempt to label them collapses their meaning into something smaller than what they were. The pre-God spirits did not create the universe in a deliberate act. Creation, as intention, belongs to later beings. Instead, reality emerged as a consequence of their interaction. Where two or more nameless ones overlapped, contradictions formed. These contradictions generated structure. From structure came repetition, and from repetition emerged stability. Matter, energy, and causality were not designed, they were precipitates, like crystals forming in a saturated solution. One may imagine the nameless ones as vast currents beneath the surface of existence. Where currents intersect, turbulence arises. That turbulence became the first proto-realities. Over immense stretches of non-time, these proto-realities led upon one another, eventually solidifying into what could be recognized as a universe. The nameless ones neither guided nor resisted this process. They simply endured it. Awareness among the nameless ones was diffuse. They did not think in sequences or speak in symbols. Their awareness was more akin to resonance. When change occurred within reality, they felt it as a shift in harmony or dissonance. This sensitivity made them reactive rather than proactive. They did not plan futures, but they responded to imbalance by reasserting their fundamental tendencies. As the universe grew more complex, patterns began to persist independently of the nameless ones. Stable laws emerged. Cycles repeated. Eventually, localized centers of intentionality formed. These were the first gods, not in the moral or cultural sense, but as beings capable of self-definition. The birth of gods marked a turning point, identity entered the cosmos. To the nameless ones, the rise of gods was both insignificant and disruptive. Insignificant because individuality was a minor phenomenon compared to the vastness of pre-differentiated existence. Disruptive because named beings imposed boundaries. Where gods ruled domains, they constrained flux. Where they demanded worship, they redirected attention. The universe began to develop a narrative, and narrative is an act of exclusion. Some traditions claim that the nameless ones retreated when the gods arose. This is only partially true. Retreat implies movement, and movement implies space. In reality, the nameless ones became backgrounded. They did not leave, they were overlaid. Like ancient bedrock beneath newer layers of stone, they remained foundational but unseen. Other myths speak of conflict between gods and pre-god spirits. These stories should not be read as literal wars. Rather, they encode metaphysical transitions. When a god of order triumphs over a primordial chaos, it symbolizes the stabilization of a system previously governed by fluctuation. When a sun god chains a formless abyss, it represents the triumph of definition over ambiguity. Despite their marginalization, the nameless ones were never destroyed. Destruction requires an external force acting upon a defined target. The nameless ones had no clear boundaries to erase. Instead, they became dormant in a specific sense. Their influence was constrained by the increasing rigidity of cosmic structure. Laws of physics, once established, limited the range of primordial fluctuation. Yet even within structured reality, traces of the nameless ones persist. They are felt in phenomena that resist categorization, singularities, paradoxes, emergence, and collapse. Wherever systems behave unpredictably, wherever order frays into chaos, the echo of pre-god influence can be sensed. They are not active agents in these moments, but their ancient tendencies still resonate. In some esoteric philosophies, the nameless ones are associated with the concept of the abyss, not as evil, but as indifference. They do not judge, reward, or punish. Moral frameworks arose with societies and their gods. The nameless ones predate value itself. To them, existence and non-existence are merely different configurations of persistence. This moral neutrality has led some later cultures to fear them. What cannot be negotiated with is often labeled monstrous. Rituals meant to ward off formless horrors are, in symbolic terms, attempts to reinforce the boundaries that keep reality intelligible. The fear is not of destruction, but of dissolution, of returning to a state where meaning has not yet formed. Conversely, mystics and philosophers have sometimes sought communion with the nameless ones. Such pursuits are described as dangerous, not because the pre-God spirits are hostile, but because contact erodes the self. To experience existence without identity is to risk losing one's own. Enlightenment and annihilation become indistinguishable at that threshold. Language consistently fails when addressing the nameless ones. Any description relies on metaphor, and metaphor implies comparison. Yet there is nothing truly comparable to preconceptual existence. This is why accounts of the nameless ones vary wildly across cultures. Some describe them as many, others as one. Some depict them as sleeping giants, others as endless voids. Each is an approximation shaped by the limits of expression. The nameless ones, pre-God spirits. Before gods were named, before myth learned to speak in titles and hierarchies, there existed entities known only in fragments of memory and implication, the nameless ones. These pre-God spirits were not deities in the familiar sense, nor were they mere forces of nature. They were conditions of existence itself, awareness without identity, power without intention, presence without narrative. To understand them is not to catalogue beings, but to approach the threshold where being itself first learned how to be. The nameless ones emerged in the earliest conceptual moment of reality, when distinction had not yet solidified into form. There was no sky to rule, no underworld to govern, no mortals to worship. Instead, existence unfolded as a raw continuum of potential. Within this continuum, the nameless ones coalesced not as individuals, but as self-sustaining states of primordial awareness. They did not exist in space and time, rather, space and time condensed around their persistence. Unlike later gods, the nameless ones had no fixed shapes. Form, as a concept, had not yet stabilized. They manifested as tendencies: compression, expansion, recursion, stillness, dissolution. When later myths describe them as storms, shadows, or endless seas, these are metaphors imposed retroactively by minds that require imagery. In truth, the nameless ones were closer to principles than personalities, yet more aware than mere laws. They are called nameless not because names were forgotten, but because names were impossible. A name requires separation, this thing as opposed to that thing. The nameless ones existed prior to such divisions. To name them would have been to diminish them, to force singularity onto what was inherently plural and fluid. Even now, any attempt to label them collapses their meaning into something smaller than what they were. The pre-God spirits did not create the universe in a deliberate act. Creation, as intention, belongs to later beings. Instead, reality emerged as a consequence of their interaction. Where two or more nameless ones overlapped, contradictions formed. These contradictions generated structure. From structure came repetition, and from repetition emerged stability. Matter, energy, and causality were not designed. They were precipitates, like crystals forming in a saturated solution. One may imagine the nameless ones as vast currents beneath the surface of existence. Where currents intersect, turbulence arises. That turbulence became the first proto-realities. Over immense stretches of non-time, these proto-realities layered upon one another, eventually solidifying into what could be recognized as a universe. The nameless ones neither guided nor resisted this process. They simply endured it. Awareness among the nameless ones was diffuse. They did not think in sequences or speak in symbols. Their awareness was more akin to resonance. When change occurred within reality, they felt it as a shift in harmony or dissonance. This sensitivity made them reactive rather than proactive. They did not plan futures, but they responded to imbalance by reasserting their fundamental tendencies. As the universe grew more complex, patterns began to persist independently of the nameless ones. Stable laws emerged. Cycles repeated. Eventually, localized centers of intentionality formed. These were the first gods, not in the moral or cultural sense, but as beings capable of self-definition. The birth of gods marked a turning point. Identity entered the cosmos. To the nameless ones, the rise of gods was both insignificant and disruptive. Insignificant because individuality was a minor phenomenon compared to the vastness of pre-differentiated existence. Disruptive because named beings imposed boundaries. Where gods ruled domains, they constrained flux. Where they demanded worship, they redirected attention. The universe began to develop a narrative, and narrative is an act of exclusion. Some traditions claim that the nameless ones retreated when the gods arose. This is only partially true. Retreat implies movement, and movement implies space. In reality, the nameless ones became backgrounded. They did not leave, they were overlaid. Like ancient bedrock beneath newer layers of stone, they remained foundational but unseen. Other myths speak of conflict between gods and pre-god spirits. These stories should not be read as literal wars. Rather, they encode metaphysical transitions. When a god of order triumphs over a primordial chaos, it symbolizes the stabilization of a system previously governed by fluctuation. When a sun god chains a formless abyss, it represents the triumph of definition over ambiguity. Despite their marginalization, the nameless ones were never destroyed. Destruction requires an external force acting upon a defined target. The nameless ones had no clear boundaries to erase. Instead, they became dormant in a specific sense. Their influence was constrained by the increasing rigidity of cosmic structure. Laws of physics, once established, limited the range of primordial fluctuation. Yet even within structured reality, traces of the nameless ones persist. They are felt in phenomena that resist categorization, singularities, paradoxes, emergence, and collapse. Wherever systems behave unpredictably, wherever order frays into chaos, the echo of pre-god influence can be sensed. They are not active agents in these moments, but their ancient tendencies still resonate. In some esoteric philosophies, the nameless ones are associated with the concept of the abyss, not as evil, but as indifference. They do not judge, reward, or punish. Moral frameworks arose with societies and their gods. The nameless ones predate value itself. To them, existence and non-existence are merely different configurations of persistence. This moral neutrality has led some later cultures to fear them. What cannot be negotiated with is often labeled monstrous. Rituals meant to ward off formless horrors are, in symbolic terms, attempts to reinforce the boundaries that keep reality intelligible. The fear is not of destruction, but of dissolution, of returning to a state where meaning has not yet formed. Conversely, mystics and philosophers have sometimes sought communion with the nameless ones. Such pursuits are described as dangerous, not because the pre-god spirits are hostile, but because contact erodes the self. To experience existence without identity is to risk losing one's own. Enlightenment and annihilation become indistinguishable at that threshold. Language consistently fails when addressing the nameless ones. Any description relies on metaphor, and metaphor implies comparison. Yet there is nothing truly comparable to preconceptual existence. This is why accounts of the nameless ones vary wildly across cultures. Some describe them as many, others as one. Some depict them as sleeping giants, others as endless voids. Each is an approximation shaped by the limits of expression. Apep, Apophis, the eternal devourer. Apep, also known by the Greek name Apophis, stands among the most powerful and enduring embodiments of chaos in ancient Egyptian thought. Neither a simple monster nor a conventional god, Apep represents a cosmic principle, the perpetual threat of dissolution that stalks creation itself. To understand Apep is to understand how the ancient Egyptians imagined the universe, not as a static order, but as a fragile balance maintained through constant struggle. Every sunrise, every moment of continuity, was believed to be won anew against the eternal devourer, whose existence defined the very necessity of divine vigilance. In Egyptian cosmology, the universe emerged from the primeval waters of Nun, a limitless abyss of potential and disorder. From this chaos arose Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and order that structured both the cosmos and human society. Apep is the living antithesis of Ma'at. He is not merely opposed to order, he is the hunger that seeks to consume it, the darkness that strives to return existence to formlessness. Unlike most Egyptian deities, Apep had no temples, cult statues, or worshippers. He was feared, cursed, and ritually destroyed in effigy, not honored. His power lay precisely in his rejection of harmony and reciprocity. Apep is most often depicted as a colossal serpent, coiled endlessly beneath the earth or lurking in the waters of the underworld. Serpents in Egypt could symbolize renewal and protection, but Apep embodies their most terrifying aspect: infinite length, crushing strength, and silent inevitability. His body was said to stretch for miles, his jaws capable of swallowing gods, boats, and even light itself. Some texts describe him as having multiple coils, hypnotic eyes, or a thunderous roar that shook the duat, the realm through which the sun god traveled each night. These descriptions emphasize scale and persistence rather than personality, reinforcing Apep's role as an impersonal cosmic force. The central myth involving Apep is his nightly battle with Ra, the sun god. Each evening, Ra descended into the duat aboard his solar bark, carrying light, life, and order through the darkness. Apep waited there, attempting to halt the bark by entangling it in his coils, swallowing the waters, or hypnotizing Ra's crew. If Apep succeeded, the sun would fail to rise, and the world would end. The stakes of this struggle were absolute, yet the outcome was never final. Ra defeated Apep every night, often with the help of other gods such as Set, Isis, and Mayhem, only for Apep to return again, wounded but undestroyed, on the following night. This endless repetition reveals a key aspect of Egyptian worldview. Evil, chaos, and destruction were not believed to be erasable. Apep could be subdued, cut, burned, and magically restrained, but never annihilated. His survival ensured that the universe required constant maintenance. Order was not guaranteed, it was an achievement. The daily rising of the sun was thus not a mechanical certainty, but a triumph renewed through divine effort and ritual reinforcement. Apep's role also illuminates the moral structure of ancient Egypt. Human wrongdoing, social injustice, and natural disasters were all seen as manifestations of Isfet, chaos, which strengthened Apep. Conversely, living according to Ma'at weakened him. Priests performed elaborate rituals known as the overthrowing of Apep, involving the recitation of spells, the stabbing of serpent effigies, and the burning of written curses. These rites were not symbolic theater alone, they were believed to have real cosmic impact, assisting Ra in his nightly battle and safeguarding the world. Interestingly, Apep is not portrayed as a rebel seeking dominion, unlike many later mythic villains. He does not desire worship, kingship, or recognition. He devours because that is his nature. In this sense, Apep resembles entropy itself, a relentless tendency toward disintegration rather than a conscious moral agent. This distinguishes him from gods like Set, who, though dangerous and violent, still served a necessary role within the cosmic order. Apep, by contrast, exists entirely outside acceptable balance. The relationship between Set and Apep is particularly revealing. Set, often viewed as a god of chaos, is paradoxically one of Ra's chief defenders against Apep. Armed with a spear, Set stands at the prow of the solar bark, striking the serpent as it rises from the darkness. This imagery underscores an important nuance: not all chaos is equal. Controlled violence and disruption can serve order, while absolute negation, embodied by Apep, must be resisted at all costs. Egyptian mythology thus presents a sophisticated spectrum rather than a simple binary of good and evil. Over time, Apep's imagery evolved but his essence remained constant. In later periods, he became increasingly associated with darkness, storms, earthquakes, and foreign threats. His name was invoked in execration texts designed to destroy enemies of the state, equating political disorder with cosmic annihilation. Even as Egyptian religion absorbed foreign influences and underwent internal changes, Apep remained the ultimate adversary, the shadow against which all stability defined itself. The Greek rendering of his name as Apophis influenced later interpretations, particularly in modern esoteric and literary traditions. In some contemporary retellings, Apep is recast as a dragon, a demon, or a god of evil comparable to Satan. While such comparisons can be evocative, they risk oversimplifying his role. Apep is not a fallen angel or moral tempter, he is a metaphysical danger. His presence explains why vigilance, ritual, and ethical living matter. Without Apep, Ma'at would lose its urgency. Apep's enduring power as a symbol lies in his inevitability. He cannot be slain forever, only opposed continually. This vision resonates far beyond ancient Egypt. It reflects a worldview in which darkness is not an anomaly but a permanent possibility, and where survival depends on repetition, discipline, and collective responsibility. The Egyptians did not dream of a final victory over chaos, they believed in the necessity of standing against it every day. In this light, Apep is not merely a monster lurking in mythic shadows. He is the eternal devourer because he devours eternally, testing the strength of gods and humans alike. His coils encircle the fragile miracle of existence, reminding the world that order is precious precisely because it is threatened. Each dawn, as Ra rises victorious once more, Apep retreats, defeated yet undying, awaiting the next night. And so the cosmos endures, not through certainty, but through unending struggle. Beyond cosmology, Apep also functioned as a psychological and social symbol. For the ancient Egyptians, fear itself had a shape, and that shape was the endless serpent waiting in darkness. Nighttime, storms, eclipses, and moments when the Nile failed to rise all carried the implicit suggestion that Apep was momentarily ascendant. By giving chaos a name and a form, Egyptian religion rendered it intelligible and therefore resistible. One could speak against Apep, curse him, and imagine him wounded. This act of conceptualization transformed anxiety into action, reinforcing communal resilience. Funerary texts further expanded Apep's significance. In the Book of the Dead and earlier coffin texts, the deceased hoped to join Ra's retinue and assist in the nightly defense of the solar bark. To do so, they had to demonstrate knowledge of Apep's secret names, weaknesses, and the spells required to bind him. Knowledge itself was a weapon against the devourer. Ignorance left one vulnerable, while ritual literacy aligned the soul with cosmic preservation. Thus, even in death, Egyptians believed they could participate in the eternal struggle. The imagery used against Apep was deliberately violent and repetitive. Texts describe him being chopped into pieces, scorched by fire, trampled, and pinned with knives. These descriptions were recited again and again, emphasizing not novelty but insistence. Repetition weakened Apep because repetition mirrored Ma'at, stability through continuity. The priests understood that the words themselves mattered less than their faithful renewal. In this sense, liturgy became a metaphysical technology, sustaining reality through rhythm and memory. Apep's association with darkness also shaped Egyptian concepts of time. Night was not merely the absence of day, it was an active battlefield. Hours of the night were personified as gates or caverns, each with guardians and dangers. Apep lurked especially at the deepest point, just before dawn, when exhaustion and uncertainty peaked. The sun's rebirth at sunrise symbolized not only victory, but relief. Every morning was evidence that the devourer had failed once again. Despite his monstrous portrayal, Apep was never chaotic in a random sense. His attacks followed a pattern, his defeats were expected, and his return was certain. This predictability paradoxically made him part of the cosmic system he opposed. Without an enemy, there could be no heroism, no renewal, no proof of Ma'at's strength. In this way, Apep functioned as a necessary antagonist, though never a legitimate one. He justified effort without deserving acceptance. Modern interpretations often view Apep through existential or philosophical lenses. He can be read as the embodiment of entropy, the natural tendency of systems to decay unless energy is constantly applied. He can also be understood as a mythic representation of depression, despair, or meaninglessness, forces that cannot be reasoned away but must be resisted daily. These readings do not replace ancient meanings, but they demonstrate the adaptability of the symbol. Apep's absence of cult worship is particularly striking when compared to other fearsome Egyptian gods. Even deities associated with plague or death received offerings to appease them. Apep did not. Appeasement implied negotiation, and negotiation implied shared values. Apep shared none. The only appropriate response was rejection and resistance. This absolute stance reveals an ethical boundary within Egyptian thought. Some forces cannot be integrated and must simply be opposed. The eternal devourer therefore occupies a unique place in myth. He is omnipresent yet unseen, defeated yet undefeated, essential yet unacceptable. His story teaches that creation is not a finished act but an ongoing responsibility. The gods fight, humans uphold Ma'at, priests speak the spells, and the sun rises because all these actions. As the echoes of ancient myths fade, remember these monsters were never just stories. They were mirrors of humanity's oldest fears, warnings carved into legend long before history was written. If these creatures stirred your curiosity, let the past keep haunting you. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What ancient monster unsettles you most? Until our next descent into forgotten worlds, keep questioning the shadows, keep listening to the old whispers, and never forget, the oldest myths never truly die. They wait, patient and timeless, for us to remember them again in the darkness, where fear sleeps lightly forever there.